Good morning, a warm welcome to all the attendees. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this event. It's an honor for me to speak at this plenary session. I am very happy that this conference is taking place in Rwanda, and I greet all the participants, and I greet and warmly embrace especially the Rwandan women. I would like to begin by celebrating the persistent work done by Women Deliver. I believe it is essential that women all around the world work together for gender equality and sexual and reproductive health. Women have fought against many forms of violence for years, decades, and centuries. We've had to transgress the roles imposed on us to be able to live in dignity, to work for a more just society, for ourselves, for our daughters, and for our grandchildren. We have undoubtedly made progress, but there is still much more to be done. As we've moved forward and begun to influence and occupy power spaces, we have celebrated our achievements, but we should not rest on our laurels. It's very important that we are becoming key actors in local politics and global geopolitics. But that implies continuing the fight for justice in favor of women. As women, we must move forward the agendas for change beyond our borders. Globally, we have the capacity and the responsibility to raise issues that have been neglected because they are not considered relevant, or because they are issues that only pertain to women and to their supposedly and exclusive role as caregivers and birthing persons. This conference calls us to discuss sexual and reproductive rights, because the first thing I have to do is that historically it has been women who have borne most of the burden and the blame for sexuality and reproduction. It has been women who at some point are made responsible that the state and society do not provide training to have a sexual and reproductive life that is adequate and healthy. When we are teenagers, we are pregnant and we have been pointed as the blame by the society and the state. It has been women who at some point in our lives have heard that we are only good for giving birth. Those who, for lack of sexual education, bear in our own bodies the consequences of teenage and unwanted pregnancies will always be the first to be judged, to be blamed. When the state does not offer equal conditions for a dignified life for all, it's women's fault for bringing babies into the world. We see how women are blamed for the climate change effects, and they are blamed for having so many children, because the overpopulation is supposedly killing the planet and overlooking the real causes of climate crisis. Women and children all over the world are subjected to abuses, sexual violence, and harassment on an ongoing basis, and to come forward place women and children under the suspicion of being the responsible for those acts. They are accused of dressing suggestively, of being out at the wrong time or place, and of being too compliant or complacent, or of sending misleading signals to the perpetrator. And in the case of men that also suffer this type of violence, they are taught to keep silent, because coming forward or filing a complaint undermines their manhood, makes them less males. So it is no coincidence that all over the world, women are afraid and ashamed to report gender-based violence that's afflicting them. In many cases, violence escalates and only becomes public when women fall victim to femicides. It is then that women end up being blamed even for their own femicides, for being passive or tolerant, and for not having defended themselves. The patriarchal system has deprived value to women's humanhood. That's why men believe they have the right to murder their partners, because the system has made them believe so. There are countries where femicides come under the guise of crimes of passion, outbursts of jealousy, or crimes of honor. And this exonerates men and reduces their sentences. That's why we need to build a judicial system that has the necessary tools to ensure that gender-based violence do not go unpunished. We must break apart from the colonial and patriarchal structures that underpin our societies. We cannot abide by a law that is within the patriarchal system. We need to deconstruct patriarchism, racism, to eliminate intersectional violence, race, gender that cross-cut the bodies of women, marginalized populations, and the inhabitants of impoverished populations see that their rights are undermined in most of the cases. Women that are discriminated against because of their race, that are subject to stereotypes, they are hypersexualized and seen as second or third class women, cannot exercise their sexual and reproductive rights in the same way. Impoverished women who don't have access to sexual education do not have the means to access contraceptive methods, and once they become pregnant, they find even more obstacles to fulfill their reproductive expectations. They do not have sexual and reproductive rights in the same way. Questioning the will of women in terms of sexual and reproductive rights reflect the big gender inequality that is placed on women, and they bear the brunt of childbearing on a sole basis because fathers neglect their responsibility very easily. Women are faced with social judgment for terminating their pregnancies if the governments and the states allowed them to do so. They are penalized, their abortion is penalized, but men who abandon their children and their partners, the teenagers and pregnant women, are never put on the line or challenged. They abort their fatherhood role very easily.
As regards sexually transmitted diseases, women are also criticized more. They are the ones responsible for the transmission of these diseases, whereas many times men are the ones who mainly transmit them. So all these practices are not judged, condemned, or questioned as they should be in this patriarchal culture. These practices have to be transformed so as to make progress towards a dignified sexual and a dignified life. Today, we have to take into account and discuss these problems based on intersectionality, taking into account the different types of violences faced by the different feminist diversities. In Colombia, our government, the government of the change, is working to implement a national policy on sexual and reproductive rights, a policy that guarantees rights and resolves the inequalities that affect the enjoyment of those rights. We want to address those rights and guarantee reproductive rights while defending the sexual rights of our population. We understand that as a state, we have to propose comprehensive policies and concrete initiatives that guarantee healthy and safe maternities, that eliminate child pregnancy and prevent adolescent pregnancy. All these must be considered also in order to avoid having unwanted pregnancies. Unfortunately, our country ranks 20th globally among the countries with the highest number of married or partnered girls. In Colombia and in the world, we want to eliminate these practices because they lead to violations and abuses, sexual abuses. They result in early pregnancies, in physical and psychological violence, and in economic dependence on the partner. They result in girls and adolescents who are unable to develop a life project of their own. On many occasions, they submit their will and their life to the designs of their partner. We support universal health coverage, but it includes access to sexual and reproductive health. We must bring health and menstrual and mental care to adolescent girls from vulnerable populations where access to health supplies is limited. We must then guarantee full respect for pregnant women and pregnant mothers and mothers in childbirth because sexual and reproductive health should be a constitutional right. We have protect pregnant mothers. We have to protect mothers in childbirth. We have to definitely eradicate obstetric violence and open the options to traditional forms of accompanying births, such as midwifery. The traditional practices that are part of our culture and that are used in our communities. As a government, we've been working and planning national policies that we will coordinate between the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Equality and Equity that we have just created. Today, at this conference, we are here together and we must do our part and exert our influence so that governments and international organizations concern themselves with the issues they have ignored for years. We should work in favor of a healthy sexual and reproductive health, because this will help women. This will help well-being in our peoples. So we continue building our country, we continue building dignity, and we continue helping women who are about to break the crystal roof, as Angela Davis says. We need to help those women to go forward and to claim for their rights. Thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this important dialogue on sexual and reproductive health. And let's continue building until dignity and equity become the norm.